Alright, so in this video we're going to be going ahead and installing the steering servo into our RC over here, and this procedure is going to be basically the same for the A35 BHM aftermarket servo or the new one that's available on the Jeffries website, the B26 CLM, also an AGFRC servo. So it doesn't matter which one of these ones you're going to be installing. Actually, I mean, it's pretty much going to be the same procedure for most any steering servo that you put into the RC, as long as it's a drop-in fit. I mean, if you have to do custom stuff just to put the servo in, it's going to depend on what kind of custom stuff you do. But for any drop-in servo, it's going to be the exact procedure to get it set up, get the endpoints in there really nice and easy. And yeah, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we need to do with any of these aftermarket servos, either the A35 BHM or the C26, the B26 CLM, the new one that's on the Jeffries website, they're both programmable servos, and I do highly suggest that we do plug these in just to adjust the settings so that they're good for a steering servo inside a lowrider. You know, these aren't, you know, crawlers or nothing. We don't really need these to be super fast and super torquey as hell. So we're just going to go over to the computer, plug the programmer in, and just adjust the settings on this to make it ideal for being used as a steering servo inside our lowriders. Alright, so let's go over and take care of that. Now, whenever you're going to go and run the program or software, I find it's always best to right click on them and run them as administrator, just to make sure that the program runs correctly. Say yes. Alright, so now we've got the programmer installed. Put the dongle in, and now we're going to plug the servo into the dongle. Alright, so we've got the servo plugged in, and the setting, we're not going to change the travel range. Again, the factory settings and most standard servos, the way they're set up, the travel range is very good for setting up a steering servo. So we're going to leave the travel range alone. We're going to drop the PWM power for the A35 BHM. This is an extremely strong servo, so I dropped the power down to 60, and I dropped the sensitivity all the way to low. So we got power 60, sensitivity low, and again we put the lose ppm protection onto release. We hit right, booyah, and now the servo is basically ready to be installed and used for a steering servo. If you do notice you want more power or you want it to be a little bit more responsive, you can adjust these settings. These are just what I suggest and what I found to be very good for using a steering servo inside the lowrider. Because keep in mind, these are low and slow. We're not really, you know, carving corners, racing around tracks, or going over rocks, steering onto one wheel with the weight of the truck or nothing. So for a RC lowrider, this is the way I got it set up. Now let's get back over to the RC and get this installed. Alright, so now that we got the servo programmed on the computer, we're going to want to set up the channel for the servo installation. So in order to do that for the steering servo, it's actually a lot easier than most. First thing we need to do is go to the endpoints, just to reduce the endpoints so that while we're setting it up, it's not gonna extend too far. So you hold the menu button, go to setup, function setup, and then endpoints. And for channel 1, which is the steering channel, you want to put it to 50/50. This way it's not going to move very much in either direction, so that we can adjust these endpoints with the servo horns installed and get them fine-tuned correctly. So now that we have this at 50/50, we're going to go ahead and save that and go ahead and install the servo into the RC. Okay, so here we have the servo already installed into the RC, but we don't have the servo horn put on yet. Good thing about steering servos is they're actually pretty easy to install and set up. and there's a lot less risk of breaking things as long as you take your time and follow the steps correctly. So now that we have the steering servo installed and plugged in, we want to power this up without the steering linkage attached. Now this right here, this is basically the factory steering linkage. I just have some custom silver rod ends, but it's the same length as factory, and this is just an aftermarket steering servo horn. So for me, I like to mount it on the inside because it gives it a more cleaner line. So you can have this all set up, the steering linkage and the servo horn already screwed together and ready to go on the servo, but don't put them on yet. First, we're going to power on the RC. So we turn on the receiver and we plug the battery into the Lowrider. All right, so now everything is plugged in. So now that we have the servo plugged in, what we're going to want to do is on the controller, we're going to want to go down to sub trim, hit enter, and we're going to want to work on channel 1. So with the servo linkages not attached, we want to straighten out the wheels as much as possible. Try and get the wheels so that the kit is driving as straight as possible. And when you got it like that, at this point we try to put the servo horn on. But because the gears don't always line up directly, the servo horn won't go on without moving forward or backwards. So what we do at this point is we adjust the sub trim until this servo horn slides on easily while the wheels are still pointed straight. So go over to the controller and we're gonna tweak the sub trim. So I'm gonna put it down some, and what I like to do is just hold this here and see when it just slides on. Ah, there we go. Oh yeah. So now the servo horn is on and our sub trim has the RC going directly straight. We will have to come back to this. You know, once you get the car driving on the motor, you want to come back to the sub trim, and if it's, you know, driving a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, you adjust the sub trim here just to straighten out the direction the RC is going. But now that we have the servo horn on the servo and the RC is going straight, we can test out our steering direction. So hold on, we're just going to save this. All right, and we want to make sure the direction is correct. So steering left, oh, that goes right, and steering right goes left. So our steering direction, oh, sorry, show it here. Our steering direction is wrong. As you can see, I go steer to the right and it steers to the left. I steer to the left and it steers to the right. So it's not a big problem. You just go up to the reverse settings, hit enter, and because steering is channel 1, you just adjust this to the opposite direction and save it. So now our steering servo should be going the right direction. Awesome. Okay, so now that we got the servo going in the right direction, we just want to double check and make sure, because we had to flip directions, it might have just, you know, foobarred the center point a little bit. We just want to make sure that the servo is still going very, very straight. The RC is driving very straight. It looks like I need to make a slight adjustment. So we go back to the sub trim, hit enter, and we just adjust the sub trim on channel 1 until the RC goes straight. Let's see. And that is a very straight driving RC. So our sub trim is good. We're gonna go ahead and save that. And now we're gonna go to the endpoints, because as you notice, it does not steer very much in either direction. So this is the most we're getting. That's not a lot. So what we do is we go to the endpoints. So back at the sub trim, go to endpoints. On here, hit enter, and we're on channel 1. So now what you want to do is you want to hold it in a direction and then keep increasing the value until you reach the maximum steering angle and it can't steer any further. Now that seems to be the max. We're going to back it back a little bit. And you'll notice that if you steer it to the full and the servo starts making a little bit of a chirping sound, that's most likely because it's going too far. We're going to give a little test here. You hear the servo? It doesn't like that, so we're going to bring that back down. Perfect, so we get good steering to the right, and now we just do the same thing for the other direction. So we're gonna go ahead and look at this wheel here. So we steer to the other direction, this way here. So now we're gonna be steering to the left, and you increase the number until it stops steering. That's pretty all right. You want to make sure that at full steer, you're not getting any chirp from the servo. Perfect. So now, notice we got full steer in both directions. Alright, so now we got full steer in both directions. We can go ahead and screw on the servo horn, finishing the process. And that is that. So we have our rear servos installed. We have the front servo, hop servo installed, and we have the steering servo installed. Now, this is for the experts. We're going to add an additional feature to our steering. So remember, we have the power brought down a little bit, the sensitivity brought down. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add Expo. So we're going to save the endpoint settings. I'm going to go down to dual rate Expo, hit enter. We're on channel 1, which is steering. The steering rate, we're going to keep that at 100. And we're going to go now and adjust the Expo. So you hit enter until it gets to the Expo. And now we're going to increase this. And you're going to watch this straight line start to curve. Now what this does is, as you give it a very, very little bit of input, it's going to give an extra small amount of steering input. And as you get closer to the full travel of the stick, the computer is going to then give more steering angle until it gets to full travel. This is basically steering Expo, a little way to make it easier to not have the servo seem so twitchy when you're trying to drive the car. So I like to put this at 60, and that gives me a nice smooth operation, and it drives and controls great while you're, driving the RC around. So with that, make sure to save it, hold the save button, and that's it. We have everything set to go. All the rear servo set up, steering servo set up, hop servo set up. All right. Next, what I'll probably do is I'll probably give a video on how to set up the ESC to give smooth throttle application, slow the car down so it's not going so fast. Just make it easier to keep the car under control. And yeah, look out for the next video on that. So with that, I do hope you liked the video. Hope these videos are helpful, and I'll catch you in the next one.